Legend spoke of a creature with the crown of a dragon and the heart of a beast lost to time. Deep within forgotten valleys where shadows dance across broken cliffs, whispers told of Dracorex. Few dare to believe, yet the evidence could not be denied. Bones shaped like armor had been unearthed, and villagers told tales of glowing eyes in the mist. To chase this legend meant stepping into a world where the past refused to die. It was not just a dinosaur. It was a king reborn, and its throne awaited challengers brave enough to seek it. In the world of ancient giants, there were many creatures that lived and perished across millions of years, yet few carried a presence as mysterious and fascinating as Dracorex. Known by the name Dracorex hogwartsia, this dinosaur captured imaginations from the moment its remains were first discovered. The name itself echoed both myth and reality, for it meant Dragon King of Hogwarts, and it stood out not only as a relic of prehistory, but as a bridge between science and wonder. Unlike the towering predators that often dominate tales of the past, Dracorex was not enormous, yet it carried a crown of bony spikes and knobs upon its head that gave it the appearance of a mythical dragon come to life. Its skull was decorated like armor, as if it had been forged by a blacksmith to fit a warrior of another realm. Dracorex belonged to the Pachycephalosaur family, which was a group of dinosaurs recognized for their thick skulls. Many of its relatives used domes of bone for combat, yet Dracorex differed because its skull was flatter and more ornate. Paleontologists wondered if it was a younger form of another species, or whether it was truly a distinct creature. This question gave rise to debate, but what could not be denied was the allure it created. Children reading about dinosaurs were fascinated by the thought of a dragon that had once walked the earth, and scientists were compelled to dig deeper into its story. The discovery of Dracorex was relatively recent in paleontological terms. In the early 2000s, fossil hunters unearthed its bones in South Dakota within rocks that dated to the late Cretaceous period, nearly 70 million years ago. The skeleton was not complete, but the skull revealed everything needed to spark excitement. Its spiky ridges and jaw full of sharp-looking teeth suggested a creature that looked fierce, though most scientists believe it was herbivorous, feeding on plants. Its head alone could inspire legends, and indeed it did. The world in which Dracorex lived was vastly different from our own. The continents were not yet in their modern shapes, and climates shifted in ways that supported vast forests, rivers, and plains. Dinosaurs roamed these regions in great numbers. Tyrannosaurs stalked prey, while hadrosaurs grazed in herds. Ankylosaurs defended themselves with clubs at the ends of their tails. Amid this dramatic world, Dracorex found its place. Smaller than the towering predators, it relied on agility, speed, and perhaps the protection of its herd. Its head was not only for display, but possibly for battle within its own kind. Male Dracorex might have fought for dominance, slamming skulls together or posturing with their ornate crests. To humans of today, the creature seems almost unreal. Its dragon-like features and name invite storytelling. It is easy to imagine Dracorex as the inspiration behind myths of dragons told across civilizations. People who stumbled upon ancient bones in centuries past may have wondered if they belonged to beasts of fire and scale. Perhaps in some ways Dracorex is the closest proof of dragon legends we have. The fascination with Dracorex also lies in how it blends science with imagination. On one hand, it was a living animal of flesh and bone that breathed, walked, and ate among others in its ecosystem. On the other hand, its appearance feels too magical, too extraordinary to belong only to science. This duality makes it a creature that captures the hearts of young and old alike. As the story of Dracorex unfolds, we move beyond bones and fossils. We step into a vision of its life. How did it survive against predators larger than itself? How did it use its spiky crown? Was it truly a distinct creature or a younger version of another giant? We may never have every answer, yet by imagining its journey we give life once more to the Dragon King of the past. The world of the late Cretaceous was a place of constant change and danger. Forests stretched wide with towering conifers and flowering plants, while rivers carved their way through fertile valleys. Herds of herbivorous dinosaurs grazed in the open fields, and in the shadows predators lurked. It was in this land that Dracorex, a young and spirited member of its herd, began to feel the stirrings of independence. Though smaller than many of the creatures around it, Dracorex carried something unique, a head crowned with spikes and knobs that gave an appearance unlike any other. Dracorex had grown up within a herd that stayed near rivers and forests where food was plentiful. The elders taught the young ones how to forage for leaves and fruits, how to avoid the territories of larger predators, and how to move as one to stay safe. Life in the herd meant safety, but it also meant limits. Each day was ruled by routine, and each choice belonged to a group rather than to the individual. For a curious young Dracorex, this safety began to feel like a cage. The moment that would shape its life began one humid afternoon. The herd was feeding near the edge of a forest when the ground trembled. At first, the vibration was faint, like distant thunder. The elders raised their heads in alarm, sniffing the air. Then came the unmistakable roar, deep, guttural, and powerful enough to silence the forest. Out from the trees emerged a predator that dwarfed the herd, Tyrannosaurus, the tyrant king. Its massive jaws dripped with saliva, and its golden eyes fixed on the herd with lethal hunger. Chaos broke instantly. Herbivores scattered in every direction, their cries filling the air. Smaller dinosaurs darted for cover, while larger ones ran in desperate herds. The Dracorex herd, though fast and agile, was at terrible risk. The predator lunged forward, crushing saplings underfoot. Dust and leaves filled the air as creatures ran for their lives. In the frenzy, the young Dracorex found itself separated from the main group. Its mother bellowed, urging it to follow, but in the stampede another dinosaur crashed between them. The youngster sprinted in the opposite direction, weaving through the trees with its heart pounding. Behind it, the roar of the predator shook the forest once more. The tyrant was not chasing the small figure, but the threat was clear. The world outside the herd was filled with dangers beyond imagination. The young Dracorex did not stop until it reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked a valley. There it collapsed, gasping for breath. The herd was nowhere in sight. The forest stretched behind, the valley below, and above the sky glowed with the orange haze of sunset. Fear and awe mingled within the creature. For the first time it stood alone, cut off from the safety of its kind. Yet in this moment of fear, another spark ignited. The young Dracorex lifted its head, its spiked crown catching the fading light. For all the dangers it now faced, there was also freedom. No elder told it where to feed or how far to roam. No herd forced it into routine. Ahead lay a world full of risk, but also full of possibility. The inciting incident was not simply the attack of the predator. It was a separation from the herd. A single moment of chaos had changed everything. The Dracorex was now alone in a vast land, forced to rely on its own instincts and strength. To survive, it would need to learn quickly, to test the limits of its speed, to wield the power of its spiked skull, and to face dangers that even the safety of the herd could not protect against. As the shadows lengthened across the valley, the young Dracorex stood tall. Fear still pressed on its chest, yet curiosity burned brighter. The tyrant's roar had not ended its story. It had only begun it. The first night alone was the hardest. The young Dracorex crouched in the shadows of the rocky outcrop, its body pressed close to the ground. Every sound of the forest seemed louder than before. The rustle of leaves, the crack of branches, the shrill calls of nocturnal creatures. Without the herd surrounding it, every sound felt like a threat. The moon rose high above, silver light filtering through the canopy, casting the forest in pale shadows. Hunger gnawed at its belly, but fear kept it from moving. It waited, trembling, until dawn painted the horizon with light. When morning came, the Dracorex rose on unsteady legs. Its first task was survival. The herd had always known where to find food and water, but alone the youngster had to discover this knowledge for itself. It followed a faint animal trail that wound through the trees until it led to a stream. The water was clear and cool, and for a moment, relief filled its chest. It drank deeply, quenching the thirst that had burned through the long night. Yet even as it drank, a shadow rippled across the water. Lifting its head, the Dracorex froze. Across the stream, half hidden in reeds, crouched a predator. Smaller than the tyrant that had scattered the herd, this one was leaner and faster, a pack-hunting raptor. Its sickle-shaped claws gleamed as it lowered into a stalking posture. Instinct screamed in the young Dracorex's body. With a snort, it spun and bounded away, kicking up dirt and leaves as the raptor slashed through the undergrowth in pursuit. The chase carried them through dense forest, over logs and tangled roots. The Dracorex's short arms pumped as its legs carried it forward with surprising speed. It zigzagged through narrow gaps where the predator could not easily follow. Its spiked head bobbed low, protecting its throat as it barreled through brush. At last, it reached a steep slope of loose rock and scrambled upward, stones tumbling beneath its feet. The raptor leapt after it, but the slope shifted under its claws, dragging it down into the undergrowth. Breathless but alive, the Dracorex crested the ridge and collapsed. It had survived its first true test. Days turned into a blur of challenges. Hunger pushed the young creature to wander farther than it ever had before. It discovered groves where low-hanging branches carried tender leaves and patches of ferns that grew thick and green in shaded glens. Each meal was a victory, yet each forage carried danger. Insects swarmed in clouds, biting at its scales. Larger herbivores shoved it aside from food patches, forcing it to retreat. On several occasions, it glimpsed predators stalking at the edges of its vision. Long-snouted belosaurs, sleek dromaeosaurs, and the massive silhouettes of tyrannosaurs in the distance. Loneliness was perhaps the deepest wound. At night, the Dracorex sometimes lifted its head and gave soft calls into the darkness, hoping its herd would answer, but the forest returned only silence or the howls of predators. The lack of voices around it pressed like a weight. To cope, the youngster grew sharper, more observant. It learned to read the calls of birds overhead, which often warn of approaching danger. It learned to spot tracks in the dirt and to avoid trails that smelled of blood and death. Independence was no longer a choice. It was survival. One morning, as mist curled between the trees, the Dracorex encountered something new. While foraging along the edge of a clearing, it spotted movement among the ferns. At first it tensed, ready to flee. Then, from the greenery, emerged another Dracorex. Smaller, thinner, with scars along its flank, it stood with wide eyes. Both froze, staring at each other. The young loner's heart pounded. It had not seen one of its own kind since the attack that scattered the herd. The two circled cautiously. Their species was not known for aggression within their kind, but fear and hunger sharpened tempers. A tense moment passed before the scarred one lowered its head and began to forage. Relieved, the loner joined in. Together they fed, keeping wary eyes on the forest. For the first time in many days, the young Dracorex felt something like safety, yet safety was fragile. Their companionship lasted only a handful of days before disaster struck. While exploring a valley dotted with cycads, the pair stumbled into a hunting ground of a predator far deadlier than the raptor, a massive Allosaurus. The ground shook with its steps as it emerged, jaws wide, serrated teeth flashing. The scarred Dracorex squealed and bolted, while the loner froze. The predator lunged with terrifying speed. In desperation, the young Dracorex lowered its head and charged. Its crown of spikes slammed into the predator's leg. The impact startled the Allosaurus, giving just enough time for the Dracorex to dart sideways into a thicket. Branches tore at its hide as it ran until its lungs burned. When at last it stopped, the scarred companion was gone, fled in another direction, perhaps alive, perhaps not. Once more the young Dracorex was alone, but this time with the knowledge that its crown of spikes could be more than decoration. It could be a weapon. With each passing trial, strength grew within the youngster. Its muscles hardened from constant travel. Its senses sharpened from endless vigilance. Where once fear paralyzed it, now instinct pushed it to act. It discovered how to blend into undergrowth when predators passed, and how to strike its head against smaller rivals to defend food patches. The forest no longer seemed entirely hostile. It was still dangerous, but it was also a place where cunning and courage could carve out survival. Seasons shifted. Rain swelled rivers, flooding valleys and driving prey to higher ground. Heat baked the earth, wilting plants and forcing long journeys for food. The young Dracorex adapted to each change, learning resilience where once there had been only fear. Though loneliness never left, determination replaced despair. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, the Dracorex crested a ridge and looked down into a wide plain. Herds grazed below, massive ceratopsians with horns gleaming, hadrosaurs moving in rhythmic groups. Among them moved shadows of predators, but the balance of life held. Watching from its perch, the Dracorex felt the pull of destiny. It was no longer the frightened youngster who had fled from the tyrant. It was something more, a survivor forged by countless trials, armed with courage and a spiked crown that gleamed in the fading light. And yet the greatest test still waited. Somewhere in the forests and plains lurked the predator that had first scattered the herd, the tyrant king whose roar had begun this journey. To truly claim its place in this world, the Dracorex would one day face that roar again. The sun hung low over the horizon, staining the forest canopy with fire-red light. Cicadas droned in waves, their calls rising and falling with the heat of the evening. The young Dracorex moved carefully through the undergrowth, its muscles taut beneath its scaled hide. It had grown since the day of terror, when its herd was torn apart. Now it carried the hard strength of survival, legs carved with endurance, senses sharpened by countless brushes with death, and a crown of spikes that gleamed like a natural weapon. Yet even with this strength, unease gripped its chest. The forest had gone silent. Every instinct screamed a warning. Birds had fled the canopy. The usual chatter of smaller creatures was gone. The air itself felt heavy, as if holding its breath. The Dracorex froze, head low, nostrils flaring. Then came the sound, the deep, rolling thud of heavy footsteps. Each impact trembled through the soil, drawing closer with grim inevitability. The Dracorex knew that rhythm. It was the same beat that had once shattered its life. The trees parted, and there it stood. The tyrant had returned. Massive jaws, jagged teeth glistening in the dying light. Its scarred hide bore the marks of countless battles, but its eyes burned with hunger and dominance. This was no pack hunter or opportunistic predator. This was a terror that had scattered the herd, the force of nature that reigned over all. The Dracorex's body locked between terror and defiance. It could run, as it had run before. But where would running lead? Endless flight, endless fear. Survival had hardened it, shaped it for this moment. Something primal surged in its chest. It lowered its head, spikes forward, and bellowed a sharp, defiant call that echoed through the forest. The tyrant answered with a roar so powerful it shook leaves from branches. The battle had begun. The predator lunged, jaws wide. The Dracorex darted aside, its smaller frame nimble where the giant was heavy. Teeth snapped shut where it had stood an instant before, splintering a tree trunk. The Dracorex struck back, ramming its spiked crown against the predator's leg. Bone met bone, and the tyrant staggered with a thunderous snarl. But the beast was not slowed for long. Its tail whipped around like a battering ram, slamming the Dracorex and sending it tumbling through ferns. Pain flared through its side, but adrenaline forced it back to its feet. Again the tyrant advanced, each step deliberate, eyes locked on its quarry. The Dracorex circled, searching for an opening. The clearing around him became a battlefield. Trunks splintered, plants crushed under their struggle. The predator lunged again, jaws snapping inches from the smaller dinosaur's flank. The Dracorex twisted at the last second, spikes scraping across the tyrant's snout. Blood welled in crimson streaks, and the roar that followed split the air like thunder. This was no easy fight. Strength against speed, power against determination. Time and again the tyrant pressed forward, its massive bulk forcing the Dracorex backward. The ground grew torn with claw marks and streaked with blood, some from the predator, some from the defender. The young Dracorex's breath came ragged, yet within its chest burned a fire that refused to be extinguished. The battle reached its peak when the tyrant drove the Dracorex against a fallen log. Nowhere left to run. The predator reared, jaws descending like a trap. In that instant, the young survivor summoned every ounce of courage it gained through endless trials. With a desperate cry, it surged forward, ramming its crown upward into the predator's throat. The spikes sank deep into vulnerable flesh. The tyrant recoiled, choking, blood spilling across its chest. Its roar turned into a guttural gurgle as it staggered back, snapping wildly at empty air. The Dracorex did not relent. Fueled by raw will, it struck again and again, each impact driving spikes deeper, each blow a defiance against the fate that had once left it alone and broken. The predator's massive body swayed. Its strength was unmatched, but wounds and surprise had turned the tide. With one final desperate thrust, The Dracorex slammed its head forward with all its weight. The tyrant collapsed with an earth-shaking crash, its body convulsing before it grew still. Silence swept the battlefield once more. The Dracorex stood trembling, its flanks heaving, blood streaking its crown and scales. The world felt impossibly quiet after the roar of battle. Its legs nearly gave way, but it refused to fall. Instead, it lifted its head toward the sky and released a triumphant cry, the voice of a survivor who had faced the greatest terror and endured. This was no longer the frightened hatchling who had once scattered into the forest. This was a creature reborn by struggle, sharpened by pain, and crowned with victory. The tyrant lay defeated at its feet. The cycle of fear had ended. The young Dracorex had claimed its place in the world, not just as prey, but as a warrior of survival. The forest lay still in the aftermath of battle. Dust drifted through shafts of red sunlight that pierced the canopy, settling slowly over the shattered clearing. Broken branches lay scattered like bones. Ferns flattened where the predator's body had thrashed in its final moments. The air still carried the copper tang of blood, mingled with the earthy scent of torn soil. At the center of this ruin stood the Dracorex, sides heaving, its crown of spikes smeared crimson. The massive carcass of the tyrant loomed nearby, half-shadowed beneath fallen limbs. Its chest no longer rose. The silence of death surrounded it, so different from the thunderous power it had once carried. The Dracorex stared for a long moment, muscles twitching from exhaustion. It had fought not only for survival, but for a chance to end the shadow that had haunted its memories. Now that shadow lay defeated, yet the weight of the victory pressed down as heavily as the exhaustion in its bones. Slowly, carefully, the Dracorex stepped back from the fallen predator. Its legs shook, each step unsteady. A gash ran across its flank from the tyrant's tail strike, and bruises darkened its sides where it had been thrown against a log. Pain radiated through every part of its body, but none of it outweighed the fire still burning in its chest. For the first time since the loss of its herd, the young survivor no longer felt hunted. Around the clearing, the forest began to stir again. Birds returned in cautious flutters to the treetops. Insects buzzed, emboldened by the stillness of the great body on the ground. Small scavengers emerged from shadows, testing the air for opportunity. Life resumed its rhythm, indifferent to the fallen giant. Nature wasted nothing. Soon the predator's body would feed countless others, its strength broken down, and return to the cycle of the land. The Dracorex limped away from the clearing. Every step was a reminder of the battle, but with each breath the weight of fear lifted. The memory of it heard still lingered, the cries of those lost still echoing. Yet this battle had reshaped those echoes. Where once they carried sorrow and helplessness, now they carried strength. The young survivor had fought not only for itself, but in honor of what had been lost. As twilight deepened, the Dracorex paused at the edge of a stream. Cool water shimmered under the fading light, reflecting its blood-streaked face and the jagged crown of spikes. It lowered its head and drank, the chill of the stream soothing its parched throat. The taste of survival lingered as much as the water itself. It raised its head again and gazed at the reflection, seeing not the frightened creature of the past, but the warrior it had become. The night chorus began as stars pierced the sky. Frogs croaked along the water's edge, and nocturnal hunters called from the canopy. The Dracorex listened, steadying its breath. Though predators would always exist and dangers would always stalk the shadows, the fear that had once defined its every movement had been broken. It had stood against the greatest terror it had ever known and prevailed. The forest no longer seemed like a maze of threats. Instead, it stretched before the Dracorex as a land of possibilities. New paths waited to be carved, new territories to be explored, new moments to live without the constant weight of dread. Survival was no longer only about running. It had become about claiming space, about walking with the strength earned through pain. As the Dracorex moved deeper into the forest, its silhouette blended with the shadows of ferns and trees. Behind it, the clearing remained scarred by battle. Yet already the first whispers of regrowth stirred in the soil. In time, the plants would reclaim the ground, erasing the traces of clash. But the memory of the fight would remain in the survivor, etched into its bones like scars. The falling night cradled the land, and the Dracorex pressed onward, carrying victory not as a crown of dominance, but as proof of resilience. Every creature faced struggle, and every life carried risk. What mattered was not how long it had fled, but how fiercely it stood when there was no choice left but to fight. Dawn arrived softly, spreading a pale glow across the forest. Mist clung to the undergrowth, curling around tree trunks like drifting spirits. Birds greeted the new day with scattered calls, their songs rising through the canopy. The Dracorex stirred where it had rested through the night. Muscles still ached from the battle, wounds throbbed with dull pain. Yet the weight of survival pressed forward. The long night had given space for thought. Now the morning light revealed more than just another day. It revealed a path toward new life. The Dracorex moved slowly through the mist, steps deliberate and steady. Each footprint marked not only its journey, but also its transformation. Once it had lived in constant fear, running from shadows larger and stronger than itself. That fear had cost it a family, a home, and countless nights of restless wandering. But survival had hardened its body, sharpened its instincts, and ignited something deeper. The battle with the predator had shown that it was not destined only to flee. It could stand. It could fight. It could endure. Along its path, streams glimmered like silver threads. The Dracorex paused at one to drink. Its reflection rippled across the surface, distorted yet clear enough to show the crown of spikes that arched proudly from its skull. The scars along its flank had begun to crust over, marks that would remain long after the pain faded. They were not signs of weakness, but symbols of defiance. Each wound told a story. Each scar etched survival into its very flesh. The forest itself seemed different in this new light. Where once every sound had triggered panic, now those same sounds held meaning. The rustle of leaves might signal prey instead of danger. The distant roar of a predator was not just a warning, but a reminder of battles already survived. The land was vast and filled with challenge, yet was no longer overwhelming. It was a place to claim, to navigate with strength rather than fear. As days turned into weeks, the Dracorex began to explore farther from the places it once hid. Open meadows became hunting grounds. Streams offered fresh water and fish that darted through the shallows. Herds of smaller herbivores grazed peacefully nearby, lifting their heads to watch but not scattering in terror. Wordless respect seemed to settle among them. They recognized the survivor. They recognized the one who had faced death and lived. The Dracorex no longer felt like an orphan wandering alone. Though its herd was gone, it carried them in memory with each step. Every choice, every act of defiance, every victory was shared silently with those who had fallen. In that way, they were never truly lost. The survivor honored them not through grief, but through resilience. Seasons began to shift. Rain washed over the land in heavy sheets, swelling rivers and drenching the forest floor. The Dracorex weathered the storms beneath the shelter of ancient trees, enduring each challenge with calm determination. When the sun returned, new growth erupted, painting the land in vibrant greens. Life thrived, unstoppable in its cycle. The survivor moved with it, adapting, learning, becoming more than just a creature of instinct. In time, other Dracorex appeared along the horizon. Younger ones traveled in small groups, their spiked crowns glinting in the sun. They watched the lone survivor with caution, but also with recognition. The scars spoke clearly of battles fought and won. Slowly, trust grew. The survivor had found something greater than territory. It had found kin once more. As twilight descended one evening, the Dracorex lifted its head toward the sky. Stars glittered across the darkness, eternal witnesses to every triumph and every fall. The air was cool and steady, filled with the hum of nocturnal life. For the first time since its earliest days, the survivor felt not fear nor sorrow but peace. It had walked through fire and shadow. It had faced a predator that once haunted its every step, and it had risen, stronger than before. The journey had begun with loss, but it did not end there. The journey ended with strength, with purpose, with survival. The Dracorex no longer walked as prey. It walked as a guardian of memory, a symbol of resilience, a creature reborn through struggle. And as it moved into the vast unknown, its crown of spikes caught the fading light, shining like a promise that even in the harshest world, survival was not only possible but powerful.